Welcome back folks, my name is LastKnownMeal and today we're going to be talking about Cyberpunk 2077. This is going to be my review for 2022 because we're not going to be getting any new updates for quite some time, and there has been people who want to get into this game right now and they want an updated look, so this is why I'm making this video. If you only want to see patch 1.5 changes, I'm actually going to leave you a link up here, and if you want to see the PlayStation 5 performance, I'm also going to leave a link right there so you can check it out. Now, without further wasting your time, let's get into the review itself. So after many problems and hurdles Cyberpunk 2077 had since it released, and just basically problems which were plaguing the game, after patch 1.5 things are becoming a little better. So first off, in Cyberpunk 2077 you create your own character, that either being male, female, whatever you want to choose from. Obviously, by creating your character you can also change everything else from the face, from the body, etc, etc. One of the problems I do have later on in the game is the lack of cyberware that can make you more of that robot rather than just human, which is something, that is tied to cyberpunk subgenre in general, and something which is tied to the tabletop RPG and the catalog it actually has when it comes to different prosthetics people have. So on one side, the character creation is fine, you have a lot of options, but at the same time it doesn't have a lot of options to change how you will look overall when it comes to what human body you have, what metal body you have, and so on and so on. But nevertheless, the character creation is pretty much fine. After that, you go and create your own life path. Now, life path can be Street Kid, Corpo, and Nomad, and every single one of these life paths is gonna have a different beginning and introduction to the game, so you will be starting from different positions. Keep one thing in mind, as a life path you're also gonna be able to have certain dialogues throughout the game with people who are also coming from the same background as you. So for example, if you're talking with someone who is a street kid and you're a street kid, you will be able to have a dialogue or two which you wouldn't have if you were another life path, and so on. So from that standpoint, there is that difference. Problems come later on though, because those life paths just stop being life paths after the intro itself, and through most of the game I have noticed that primarily you actually play as a street kid, and it doesn't matter which background you have, you will still play as a street kid. Now of course, V is a merc, a mercenary in the city, so he's gonna be working for everyone and anyone, but at the same time it still doesn't matter because life path is a life path, and when you're talking about something, a cyberpunk, I would rather want to have more of those choices and basically more opportunities, for example as a corpo or as a nomad, to do certain things rather than just everything ending up being a street kid path in a sense. Obviously, if I go any further into it, I would have to go into spoilers, but that's something that I personally noticed, and to be honest, I've been going through those lore books for years before the game came out, so if I tell you things are not as they should be when it comes to life paths, it is what it is, because ultimately I do want more choices, and I mean more drastic choices. Like for example, a perfect example would be New Vegas, where some of those endings can be entirely different from what you initially want to do, and they can satisfy the need of your character and how you want your character to actually act in, Night City and everywhere else. So I think that later on, especially in the first expansion, they really need to think about those things, which would ultimately not just help out different life paths, but also give the people a possibility for another replay and another replay, because ultimately every single one of those is going to be different. Now don't get me wrong, there are different endings in Cyberpunk 2077, but generally you don't really play too much as anything else besides being a street kid. When it comes to the game itself and what you do with it, it's pretty standard CDPR title when it comes to missions and objectives. So you have your main quests, you have your side activities, and you have your gigs around the map. Keep in mind, you also have those gigs tied directly with fixers around the city, so they will be giving you different tasks that you have to do, which are not going to be tied to the main thing, obviously, but they will be giving you stuff which ultimately is going to give you access to more weapons, more outfits, different vehicles, and so on, that you finish like after you finish all of their, jobs, you will get a reward in the end. So there is, a point in that. You also have points of interest like you had in The Witcher 3, basically. Like if you played it, imagine those question marks you had on the map. So throughout Night City and throughout the entire map, you will have different gang activities and so on that you can stop, interact with, and basically loot people in the end, and loot a crate in the end, which is going to either give you some weapons, it's gonna give you some armor, and so on. So basically those side activities you do around the map. The game also features various vehicles you can buy and get basically throughout those missions, which you can actually navigate throughout the city. Most cars right now after patch 1.5 act differently. It's actually a lot of fun to drive them. Before it wasn't that much, but we're gonna be going into that, soon. When it comes to the story in this game, I would be lying to you if I said that I wasn't amazed by the story. Now keep in mind, when it comes to the RPG segment, it's pretty weak when it comes to decisions you make. But at the same time, the stories themselves, the side activities, quests that you go through, there are some of them which are truly amazing. There are some quests where you don't even fire one bullet, and the quest is going to be interesting as you play through it. And one of the things which I like about Cyberpunk is that they have made a lot of quests which capture different feelings of Cyberpunk. So there is going to be one quest where you're going to be somewhat of a detective, or another one where you're going to be more of that criminal, and so on and so on. So they wanted to capture different things in different genres, for example, like thriller, or horror, or comedy, or whatever. But overall, again, when it comes to the stories and characters you meet throughout the game, it can be a lot of fun, especially once the game works, because once you actually go into those cutscenes, which are very dynamic because you can move around and people are going to be talking to you and people are going to be all around the place. So in that standpoint, it's going to be very dynamic once you enter and leave dialogue, once you enter a mission and leave it, and so on. But at the same time, there are going to be some of those quests which are going to be pretty standard, go in, do this, get out. And it's not going to have any twists and turns overall, but it's mostly tied to like those side little activities that you go through, especially connected with the fixers. But everything else, especially when it comes to the main story, it can be a lot of fun. And as I said, the characters that you interact with, they've been so well made that they will actually feel like humans. But there are problems though. There are huge problems. Some of the segments of the story in this game, especially everything which has been happening throughout the trailers and a lot of things which they have been spoiled through trailers even before the game came out, that's problematic. And there are some portions of the game, without me going into any special like spoilers, where it doesn't feel that right. And you will know what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to Act 1, which finishes too fast and it doesn't really create any special connection with the characters there, which it should have, so you actually feel, more connected to certain characters that, are involved in this first act and so on, which is one of the most important acts in the game. It's basically an introduction. So from that standpoint, I do believe those moments could have been extended so you spend more time with those characters and you are able to get a deeper relationship with those characters by going through different missions, by going through different activities, by having those small moments throughout the game, which the game does have. It does have those small moments where you talk and do stuff, but it was very weak at the beginning of the game, which is something which kind of leaves a bad taste in the mouth later on once you get into the actual story and the actual game and everything else. So I don't know, I wish the game has been more detailed in that sense and a little bit longer, because the game can be long. I mean, you can rush it and go through the main story pretty fast depending on which ending do you want, but at the same time there could have been more acts and basically more side activities with those characters, which are ultimately going to help you immerse yourself into the game. Now when we talk about those RPG elements, I have to talk about basically how it works. So RPG elements in this game are alright, you have your different choices, but at the same time you don't have any drastic choices. I've noticed in some parts of the game, especially some of the main missions, where it doesn't matter what I specifically do and which sentence do I actually say, nothing is actually going to change and influence it too much. So from that standpoint, I wish the game presented you with more drastic opportunities and drastic decisions which are going to ultimately change the way the ending happens, and not just slightly, but I mean fully. And in most cases that doesn't happen too much, and I don't know why they didn't allow more freedom in this game. There might have been some lore with Mike Pondsmith which they didn't want to break, and so on and so on, but at the same time I do believe that in some missions in this game you can be especially limiting, and I don't know why they went that way when it's you know, it's an RPG game, so allow people more freedom in the choices they make. Because there are some missions out there where those decisions and how you do them, and specifically as you go through the quest, if you don't notice something which you should, that's going to change the ending of that quest. So it does have those moments, it does have those kind of quests, but it should have been more. It should have been basically more, because in some areas it seems that one part of the story when it comes to RPG elements has been thought out and it's been fleshed out completely. On the other side, probably due to time constraint and everything which was happening due to development, it does seem there could have been more, but they probably didn't have time to develop that too much. Now the gameplay itself can be pretty fun. After, as I said, patch 1.5, the amount of bugs and glitches has been lowered a lot in this game. They do still happen, it's impossible to remove all of them because also Red Engine is causing issues, you know, at the same time. So from time to time you will run into some of the like bugs and glitches in this game which are going to be funny, but at the same time personally, and I went through the game again after patch 1.5, I haven't noticed any game-breaking bugs, at least on my playthrough, that stopped me from playing the game. Keep in mind, the first and the second playthrough I had a lot more issues than I had right now after patch 1.5. When it comes to graphics, I mean, this game is graphically phenomenal. When you look at the city, when you look at the details of the city, when you're just standing there and watching everything play out, it can be truly beautiful. They really went out of their way when it comes to their level designers, environmental designers. They did a masterful job of creating this city. This is Night City. When you think about Night City from Cyberpunk 2020, this is it. Now, it's beautiful to look at, but the problem comes when you try to interact with this world. And this is one of my biggest minuses in this game, is where Night City is this amazing place, and you know, you have NPCs walking around. They're nothing special, they're basically like, as I said, one or two dialogues. After patch 1.5 they react much better, they can draw a gun on you, so you know, there is some dynamic there. But at the same time, when you try to interact with the world, when you try to interact with just different small things, ability to eat, ability to sit, ability to drink, and look at that sunset and whatever, which immerses the game. That's why people, when they're in the world, like for example, it doesn't matter which game it is, if the game is amazing, they will sit around and look at the sunset, for example, they will look at this nature, because at the same time it takes a while to make that, and there is certain beauty in that. Same with Cyberpunk, beautiful to look at, but once you try to interact, once you try to actually live in the city, it becomes problematic, where you don't have those dynamic moments around which are not tied to a quest. Because every time when there is something happening in the city and you see something and it's like, oh yeah, this is another activity, it's usually tied to a small little quest. But locking out buildings after you finish a mission in them, there are some amazing you know, just in locations in this game, but once you finish a mission it becomes a problem because the door just locks, and that's stupid, because you just limit the city and capabilities of that city, and you basically limit what your developers have been working on. So now let me enter the goddamn place and let me be in it if I want to. So from that standpoint, I wish that changes. And don't get me wrong, of course, throughout the city you will find different things that people do, especially now. You will see like police chases now and then. Again, those are scripted and only in specific locations. You will also, like for example, meet certain NPCs doing all kinds of stuff, so it's not going to be bland. You know, there are things happening throughout the city, but everything is happening without you being too close to it and not present to it. But let me interact with the world. Let me do something throughout this world which is ultimately going to help, because not everyone wants to go and just do missions, and at the same time, once you get money from that mission, you want to spend it on something. When it comes to gunplay, weapons, armor and everything else, including your skills, the game does give you a lot, especially now. I mean, after patch 1.5, where most of those perks and abilities were actually fixed because some of them were just simply not working. So first off, you know, gunplay is amazing. I have nothing against it. Honestly, the animations they've done on how your weapon shoots, how your weapon performs, how it wields, everything else, honestly, it's been done with care and it's a lot of fun to shoot and just play around with it. So from that standpoint, it's okay. Melee combat, you know, it's a little bit, you know, it's not that deep, but at the same time it can be fun. But personally, I mostly stick to ranged weapons. But even though now you can just throw your knife and etc, so it can give you different capabilities. And not just that, because this is Cyberpunk 2077, you also have an ability to hack people, hack different objectives throughout the city, hack cameras, hack people, breach protocols, which is basically going to enable you to take full control of a building or something like that, which means, you know, turning off turrets and cameras. So from that standpoint, you know, hacking in this game can be a lot of fun. A lot of fun, especially if you're specifically going for that build. And honestly, you do have a lot of locations in this game that have different points of entry, so you will have different areas where you can enter depending on the capabilities of your characters. If you want a frontal assault, you can do that. If you want to hide and you want to go like through the roof or whatever, you can do that. Another problem comes with detection, because sometimes detection in this game works through doors and through everything, even though like the person is not even looking at you. So sometimes stealth can be problematic, because sometimes NPCs will find you and it doesn't matter if you're standing too close to them or whatever. So it can be problematic from that standpoint, but the game still allows you to go through different areas and different areas of entry into the game. Another problem, big problem that I have in this game is, for some reason, collision in this game is not working properly. So once you hit another vehicle or once you crash into anything, the collision is gonna go a little bit crazy. It's not something you got used to. For example, the normal physics where you hit something, it just does this, and you know, it's quite normal. You know, it's somewhat of a realistic crash. In this game, I don't know what's happening, but it's not working properly. So any sort of collision with vehicles is not really that fun, and that can be tied to racing, which I don't like in this game, because number one, driving is kind of scuffed when it comes to those races. Second of all, NPCs cannot drive. So what happens is that they just keep spawning, as I said in most of my videos, they just keep spawning behind you, and whatever happens, doesn't matter how many times they crash, they will just keep respawning behind you throughout the race. And if you make a mistake, they will just drive past you, and there is nothing you can do about it. In most cases, you will have to restart because you're going to lose that race. So you have, you know, if you make one error, you're kind of screwed. At the same time, if those NPCs make an error, they will be respawned, and there will be no contact, there will be no excitement throughout that race. And that's closely tied to, as I said, enemy AI, which doesn't have all functionalities, like for example, ability to drive properly, and so on and so on. It just, you get something with this, which is ultimately not fun. And that's another problem with AI, which I want to talk about. AI is fine. It's nothing special. As I said, they added many functionalities towards that AI to make it more interesting, but at the same time, it's still not it. It still has issues, especially when it comes to police and how police works in this game, where it just keeps spawning around you. There is no logic, and ultimately, it's not fun. So all in all, after many problems and many patches, things are starting to somewhat come together, and it's much more enjoyable than it ever was, especially if you're playing on PlayStation. If you have PlayStation 5 and you already have the game and you haven't played it, I recommend you get it on PlayStation 5, because it's running really well. I've been playing throughout PlayStation 5 version of the game, and honestly, I've been having least amount of issues. I have more issues on PC now that I have playing on a PlayStation 5 version, but again, you know, when it comes to the other problems, like the frame rate could be better. It's heavily tied to Red Engine, which is not doing greatest. So, I mean, even with 3070 Ti, this game has some problems to run it like really good frames. But it's no surprise, because if you really push this game to the fullest extent, the game like can be beautiful. It's also tied to the level design they have done in the game. So yeah, a lot of problems, but a lot of good and I'm glad that somewhat those things are getting fixed, so we shall see what's gonna be happening in the future. And this is everything I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this helps people who want to get into Cyberpunk 2077 right now, and tell me if you actually want to see a beginner's guide for 2022 for Cyberpunk. I will gladly make it for you, and that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. Also check us out on Twitter and Discord. Huge thanks to my current Patreon supporters, and as I said, have a great day everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.